If the Bible's got you tied in knots, if you're burdened with religious thoughts, come grab a drink and join the choir. It's Heretic Happy Hour.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Heretic Happy Hour podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Keith Giles. I'm the author of several books, including most recently Jesus Undefeated, condemning the false doctrine of eternal torment. And I am joined by my much more high energy co-hosts, Jamal and Matt. Guys, say hi.
Hi, friends. This is Jamal. Keith, you need to cheer up, man. Because
listen, somebody said something, about how that I had too much. I was too chipper, so I was just trying to calm it down.
Oh, that's so nice. That's nice of you to do that. But I have good news that may cheer you up.
Okay.
On this past Saturday, the Buckeyes defeated the University of Michigan for the 8th straight time. We blew them out over 20 points.
Oh my God! Who the hell cares?
What?
And it's good to be back on the Heretic Happy Hour with you guys.
Well, I mean, in other news, for things that you guys all care about, my name's Matt. I know y'all don't care about the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I know you care about me, and I've got a new book called Devoted as Fuck. So, yeah, go pick that up. It's a perfect Christmas gift. So please do that. So happy again to be on another episode of the Heretic Happy Hour.
Yeah, well, yes, it is. And by the way, we are in the middle of a series here. We're doing a series called Culture Wars. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things, having to do with the culture and the world we're living in today. Really fresh, hip. We know all the stuff the kids are talking about.
Totally.
Yes. And did you guys have a good Thanksgiving holiday?
Yeah.
It was okay.
Yeah, it was all right.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Well, we had a great one here, but man, we got pounded with like over 2 feet of snow here in the mountains. Lost power. Nobody could heat wouldn't come on or anything like that. So we had to we were locked out of our house for about 3 or 4 days. So staying down the mountain, but, people who have phone lines in their house weren't able to make phone calls. So if that was you weren't able to call in the hotline. So I apologize for that. But if you have a cell phone, you're probably okay. So I want to talk about the hotline for a second. We do have a hotline. And if you have cell phone coverage or if your landlines are connected, you're not in storms, you can call this number 240-343-7379. And I believe we have a text that came in. Can we cue that up? Okay. This is from a listener. Could you guys cover tithing and giving and the lies associated with paying tithes? I've been told I'm cursed if I don't. I've been told I can't go to heaven, and Jesus was a tither, and much more. I listened to the podcast you guys have here on it, but could you guys expound on the lies associated and fear tactics involved to keep people paying up? Thanks so much. Your show is such a blessing and a place of refuge. It's not easy speaking truth. God bless. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have an episode, but the listener says that they listened to the episode, so I'm not exactly sure what else we could say on it, except go back and listen to it. If you go to heretichappyhour.com, click on episodes, search for the keywords, you will find that in episode 37, we talked about it. So I'm not sure exactly what else to add.
Yeah.
Except for what we said in that episode.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say other than I think we covered it. If we did a whole episode on it, I'm pretty sure I remember we covered it in pretty much in depth where it all comes from and all the history surrounding it. And basically, bottom line, don't do it. Don't tithe.
I don't know much. I think we was pretty exhaustive on that, if I can remember correctly. But yeah,
I hope so.
Yeah.
For sure. That's
all you're going to get from us.
Totally. Unless of course you want to give towards the, if you want to give, we have a Patreon page. If you want to give to, then we may, not let you stay cursed and may address the issue for you. But
yeah, there you go.
But if you don't, you might go to hell. I'm just saying.
But if you do give to the Patreon page, you will be blessed. That's true.
Yeah. 1,000-fold.
Well, but because you get bonus content, right? And you get a bunch of cool stuff.
There you go.
Yeah. Can I make one maybe one comment about this, okay? Because I know the listener listened to the podcast about it, and I get it. It sounds like, I mean, I think when people ask questions, it's because they're bothered. There's something that's eating at them, and that's what I'm intuiting that this listener is like. He's hearing things. He's being told that he's cursed. He's been told that he can't go to heaven and all that kind of thing. Well, I mean, we can, like, there are pushbacks, there are arguments against all of that we presented in the podcast. But I would just say this to the listener, if you're listening to this, sounds like you need to stop listening to that stuff. like if I was in your shoes, I'd be like, okay, are you going to some church where they're teaching this? Like, why do you go? Seriously, why do you do it? You need to stop ask, or if there's people in your life that are kind of telling you that, then, you can love people, but you also don't have to put up with that kind of, you don't have to put up with those conversations. So you can literally draw a boundary and just say, okay, I'm not really interested in that conversation. So that would be the only thing that comes to mind is like, look, if you already know the arguments, if you're sold on it internally, but yet you're hearing this and you want more ammunition to argue with them, I just don't think that's very fruitful. You can win an argument and yet it doesn't solve anything. So I think for your own peace of mind, you might want to just ask the question, like, can I get out of Dodge here a little bit and just let them be where they're at and I be where I'm at, and cut your losses in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving along.
We got something else. We got something else on this hotline business.
I do. I think we have a voicemail.
Hi, Keith, Matt, and Jamal. My name is Adam. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a huge fan of the show. I love listening to it, and the podcast and the adjacent groups on Facebook have been a huge blessing to me in working out and better understanding my faith. I wanted to be able to pick y'all's brains a little bit about kind of some stuff I've been questioning. From what I understand, y'all identify as universalists, and as for me, I'm kind of a weird place on the subject. I grew up Southern Baptist, so definitely grew up with the hellfire damnation. And about maybe 5-6 years ago or so, I kind of found myself being drawn more towards the doctrines of annihilationism and conditionalism, essentially believing that the wicked, instead of burning forever in hell with eternal conscious torment, that they simply cease to exist, and that the immortality of the soul is in itself conditional. But for the past year or so, I've been questioning even that. I kind of find myself in this place. I personally refer to it as kind of being pulled towards universalism, kicking and screaming. I'm not sure what it is that makes me object to it. Maybe it's the idea that evil somehow has to be punished at the end. Maybe it's just my old Southern Baptist roots flaring up. I'm not sure what it is. I find myself being drawn a little bit toward what I believe is Rob Bell's theory in Love Wins, although unfortunately I have yet to read that. But I think it's the idea that everybody goes to the same place, but how it's experienced determines whether it's heaven or hell for that person. But I kind of wonder if even that's good enough. So what I wanted to ask y'all is, since I remember a lot of y'all saying you kind of came from very similar places in your faith journeys, what were y'all's biggest obstacles in getting towards an idea of universalism, and how did you reconcile with those and get past those? So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for the show. Keep doing what you're doing, and God bless. Love y'all. Bye.
Awesome.
It's a great question.
It is a good question. I think what he was describing as the Rob Bell position is really just the Eastern Orthodox. I don't know if that's Rob Bell's position, but it sounded more like the Eastern Orthodox position that everyone goes into the presence of God. Some experience that as bliss, and some experience that as torment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Eastern Orthodox are more open to the idea of universalism. Obviously, we had David Bentley Hart, who's Orthodox. He's a universalist. Brad Jerzak, and he's more in the universalist camp, although he doesn't like that word, and he explains why. Honestly, for me, the first time I heard universalism, I was on board because it was just something that resonated with my soul, and I didn't really have any hiccups like the caller had. I don't know about you guys. I the first time I heard it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of studied more and realized that it seems like a reasonable position. So I never had that sort of I'm wrestling with this, and I never went to universalism kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I definitely did. I did go through the similar to the caller, Adam. I raised Southern Baptist, was believed eternal torment because that's the only option I was ever given. So of course that was the biblical, correct Christian view. So it was only probably about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I had someone blow my mind with some things that I'd never known before, like that the majority view of the Christian church for 500 years was universalism. What? That there were 3 Christian views from the very beginning of church history. What? That was the beginning for me of like kind of weakening my belief in eternal torment. I briefly went from that to annihilationism, kind of like what the caller did. And I held on to annihilationism for a while, but then the more I continued to read and study and looking at these scriptures that supposedly teach eternal torment, I realized that's not what they're talking about at all. Jesus is not talking about what happens to anyone after they're dead. That's not what he's doing. Well, it's just the point. I mean, 2 quick things. If you're looking for proof in the Bible for scriptures, right, for eternal torment, you will find nothing in the Old Testament. And yet when Jesus, who supposedly speaks more about hell than anybody else, uses phrases like, where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, and weeping and gnashing of teeth, and the smoke of their torment rises forever, he's quoting verbatim passages from the Old Testament, which, by the way, says nothing at all about eternal torment. So what the heck is he talking about? It's not about where anyone goes after they're dead. Anyway, I talk about all this stuff in my book that just came out, Jesus Undefeated, which looks at all 3 views. And then after I personally went through this process and looked at all those scriptures and are they really saying what we think they're saying? I turned the corner into universalism, and now that's where I'm at. I pretty much now fully believe that is what Jesus is teaching. That is what Paul is teaching. And I try to make a case for it in my book. So
yes. Well, it's a great question. I think for me, a couple things stick out. One was, well, first of all, I think there's a misnomer. Once you get past the label, I mean, you would hear the label universalist, and like nobody wants to be labeled once you label somebody, then the label itself becomes a thing people either try to defend themselves from or run from or whatever. But once I started to look past the label and go, okay, well, why's everybody afraid? Because in the evangelical world, because I went to Southern Baptist University, and in that world, and I was a pastor in this, we weren't Southern Baptist per se, but doctrinally and belief wise, we did align with them. And the idea is, once I got past the term universalist, I started to ask the question like, well, wait a minute, what does the term even mean? And it means something that applies to all people. That's really what a universalist is. It's that it's something that applies universally to everybody. So then I started to realize like, well, based on that definition, all Christians, or specifically evangelical Christians, are universalists. So when someone says you're a universalist, meaning the other person's not, that's false. Everybody is a universalist. Like speaking in the Christian world, because, and again, I'm talking about people who believe the Bible and follow the Bible. All Bible followers or believers, you have to be a universalist, because Paul says, and I'm quoting the verse from Paul, it says, that just as sin or death passed to all mankind through one man, speaking of the story in Genesis, referencing Adam. So that's just as sin passed to all mankind, that's universal, something universally applied to all humanity, death. Sin passed to all humanity and all men died. So much, and I'm paraphrasing here, but how much more will the obedience or the sacrifice, or however you want to put that, of one man, talking about Jesus, give life to all mankind. So those are universal propositions. Mm-hmm. So an evangelical would say, oh, well, that doesn't really mean all. All doesn't really mean all. But they do mean that. All does mean all for the death. Because you won't hear an evangelical say death passed to some mankind. They actually believe that it applies universally to all. So there's the universalist. So I started asking myself, do I want to be a universalist when it comes to death? or when it comes to life.
There you go.
Some people are universalists when it comes to death. So that to me was a game-changing realization. Like, oh, they are preaching the message of universal death to all humanity, and only a few get the life part. Well, that doesn't sound like very good news to me.
No.
And so that's what opened my eyes in that sense. The other thing that really changed me fundamentally, out of that camp of selective, limited atonement, or, however you want to put that, really was when I got to, and it was a gradual, wasn't any one aha moment. I started to get to know who I was, myself. And that as the more I got to know me as a being, the more I realized that death is an illusion, that there's no such thing as death. There can be no such thing as death when you understand who you are. There's no such thing as, obviously this idea of being tortured. I mean, once you get rid of the pagan idea of God, that just goes out the window. But when you realize like how could you as a being be annihilated? How can you as a being not exist? It's fundamentally impossible. And I'm speaking from my understanding here. That's fundamentally impossible when you understand the nature of your own being. And which one I'm sure we'll get into a little bit in today's topic. But that's really what did it for me. I was like, oh, once you get to know who you are, as you know your essence, like the fundamental essence about you being you is that you cannot die. You have no end.
Yeah, it's a good, it is a very interesting, very fascinating topic, and great question, Adam. Thank you so much for even bringing it up.
So with that, it's time to get into our topic, and we're going to kick it off by, of course, having our Heretic of the Week.
It's the Heretic of the Week.
Hi, I'm Meggie Calvin, and I am a heretic.
Hi, Meg.
Good morning.
Yes.
Meg, it is a lovely morning. How is it out there? We're in your neck of the woods.
It is well. I do have a request for the bonfire session host for you.
Oh, you're just going to jump right in, huh? Okay.
Yeah, my request is for you to stop heckling our guests on our podcast.
Heckling?
Ooh.
I don't remember.
Matt, what have you been doing?
You have to refresh my memory because we might drink on the show. I'm not sure.
Not sure.
You don't remember?
He doesn't remember our clean comedian that we had on the listening chair that you kindly heckled a bit on social media.
Oh, well, yeah, not on the show itself. Okay, well, I wasn't heckling her. I just was making a joke about clean comedians. I don't find them funny. I didn't mean to offend anyone.
No offense. I was joking. Maybe I should do a little heckling of your man crush, David Bentley Hart, on social media.
Oh, well, good luck. You're on your own there.
Yeah, don't do that. I wouldn't recommend that. That's not a good idea. You're gonna poke a bear.
Yes. Well, okay. Well, with that said, Meg, thanks for coming onto the show and returning the favor. We've all been on your show, The Listening Chair, a couple times, and now we're honored to have you. So welcome. There will be no heckling, I promise. Well, I don't promise. There might be. But let's get right into it and ask you why people would consider you a heretic.
Yes. Well, I believe the pyramids were made by aliens.
No, that's what they were.
Wait, for real?
No, I'm just joking.
I thought they were.
Totally joking. Yeah, I think in all seriousness, probably the top four but brief reasons I might be considered a heretic by some, by many, I'm owning it, would be that I believe that God wants us to use our brains and to take control of our emotional health by owning how we were wired and aligning our environment to honor that. Secondly, I believe that we don't have to love everyone that we meet, that we can love people differently, and that we can have a different set of standards and boundaries with different relationships in our life, as opposed to the prior belief that I used to have, and that was that it was my job to be the love of the Lord to every single human being that came my way. So I no longer have that belief. The third reason I might be a heretic is I believe that confidence and ambition and self-love are not only beautiful, but they're godly and they're divine, and they're the furthest thing from sinful. And I think a lot of Christians would disagree with me on that and believe that the godliest thing you can do is to give every single ounce of credit to God and not take ownership as a co-creator with God. And that some Christians believe it's godly to shrink back and to cloak your gifts when really that offers no good, no healing to anyone. And I think the last one that shouldn't be heretical, but it is, and I think I'm the most nervous about this part in this upcoming book, is that I call out purity culture and call out the lies that it tells. And so yeah, I might lose some friends and followers on those things, those four things.
Well, that's a mouthful. Wow, but you had a long list there.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, Meg, first of all, it's Jamal, but you know that, but just for the listeners. But it's really good to hear you talk about why you're a heretic. And if I understand correctly, you come from a long line of heretics. Is that correct?
I do. Am I allowed to share that story?
Yeah, go for it.
You are. It has been decreed.
It's such a beautiful story. I think it's beautiful and sad at the same time. And it's been on my mind a lot lately. But yeah, when I was applying for seminary, when I was a youngin', my grandmother pulled out this box, and it was research she and her brother had been doing on our ancestral line. That's a fun word to say, ancestral line. And she showed me that my ancestors on my matriarch, on my mother's side, go back to Scotland. And in 1775, there was a couple named the McNains, who I am of their blood, the McNain couple, and they were burned at the stake by Catholics.
Woo!
No offense, Catholics, we love you. They were burned at the stake by Catholics for writing Protestant literature that really rocked the boat. Yeah.
I tell you what, look, all the time we've been doing this now, like we've been doing this Heretic Happy Hour podcast for more than 2 years.
Yeah.
We've interviewed dozens of heretics, but I think, Meg, you should get some kind of a medal, because I don't think we've ever had anyone on the show who is literally related to someone who was actually burned at the freaking stake for being a heretic. That is huge.
Oh,
that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, my medal is working with choir, I believe.
There you go. That's your prize.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I don't know if you have ancestral stories that bring you bravery and bring you gumption, but that one definitely brings me lots of gumption and bravery as I forge ahead with new work that I feel I was divinely nudged to do.
Isn't that great? That's really amazing how it's almost like our life extends in some way beyond our own current life. You know, like you're almost completing or working out something that began generations ago, you know, in your ancestors. It's pretty interesting. I think that's fascinating. Also, I'm really excited about your book coming out, and it's titled "I Am My Own Sanctuary." Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So first of all, I love that title. I love the title. First and foremost, because it starts with "I am." It's really interesting that, I mean, I'm sure you're brought up in the Christian tradition, but whenever we think of God, I've always been taught to think of God as a you are, as there, God is out there somewhere, and we relate to God as this separate being out there in the universe somewhere. And I always find the term "I am" to be really provocative, because you can't say the name unless you actually use it in the first person. You actually can't say it, but we're taught to say it in the second person, but it's really first person. So it's really interesting to me that "be still and know that I am God." Like if you can't actually say that and mean it, and without it being heresy in the Christian world. But it's really interesting to me that your title of your book is "Be Still and Know that," or not "Be Still and Know," but that "I am my own sanctuary." So it's like, wow, you are your own sanctuary. That's very provocative. And I don't know that what went into that title? Like, can you just talk about that a little bit? Because the sanctuaries for millennia is something else. It's in the Jewish world, it was the temple, or in the Christian world, it's you go to church, and even we have a name for the place where the magic happens every Sunday, which is called the sanctuary. You walk in there, and that's where everybody sits and listens to the pastor and sings the songs and that kind of thing. But are you saying that you're your own sanctuary? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It has been my life motto for almost 8 years now. And I first saw the quote in Latin. And of course, it was so much prettier in Latin. I don't speak Latin, but it's prettier in Latin. And it was, as many of you out there who do speak Latin can already know it, or already do know, it's "Ego Sanctuario Mio." And when I read that, I thought, this is not only my life motto, but it's also my identity that I really need to start living into.
Mm.
And so I carried it as my life motto for, like I said, almost 8 years until, and then it just became a perfect title for this book. And the reason I was so obsessed with that statement was I had noticed in a lot of spiritual or religious circles that, as I shared before, a lot of people, there were lots of voices that considered ambition and self-care and self-love as sinful and as ungodly and dirty. And I was also confused at an early age by how many ministerial leaders lacked this sense of grit or grace. And
Interesting.
any form of grit they had came from wanting to appease or impress others, and just total burnout, just utter burnout, just a total disconnect in pastors and other ministerial leaders, a disconnect of who God made them to be, and making time to tune in to that voice within and honor that. And so, we were talking about Carl Jung before we went on air, and in psychology, we have this phrase, we have this concept, this goal of being differentiated humans.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is we have this healthy balance of autonomy and togetherness, that we can be safe within our own self. We can be at peace regardless of the chaos, of the poor choices, of the hurtful words, of the fickle moods around us. If we're a differentiated person, we can be unaffected and find grace and grit within. And so that also went into why I loved that saying. That was my motto, was because I was struggling. I struggled so hard at being a differentiated person. I made every decision based off the mood of the person I was with at the moment. And then the second, this is unpacked in the first chapter of the book, the second undercurrent of the title and my life motto is that we often forget that the divine dwells within us. And so taking ownership of that and being your own sanctuary. And I know that the title is going to ruffle some feathers, and you're welcome. Just kidding.
Yes.
But I purposely made the longest chapter in the book over relationships. And that is totally intentional. And that's part of the art form of what I was trying to do with the book. But I'm in no way arguing that we don't need community, that we don't need corporate worship, that we don't need relationships and whatnot, that we don't need to think about the needs of others. But there's a way I unpack that in the book of honoring this arsenal, if I can use that phrase, this arsenal of grit and grace that we already have within us, and we just need to own it.
Yeah.
And so,
Meg,
yeah.
Well, I love that. I personally, just this idea. I love what you unpack in the book about grit and grace, and I really appreciate you talking about that from a ministerial standpoint, because, oh my goodness, I mean, pastoral burnout, like in the clergy world, is astronomical, and I think it's precisely because, I think people don't know, or we've not really learned how to be at home within ourselves, because we are ourself the source of grit and grace, because again, we literally are the carriers of the divine. But if we're like, do you think, here's a question though,
okay,
how much does being taught that we are, that there's something wrong with us, that there's something fundamentally flawed with us, how much of that like maybe it's not conscious, but unconsciously keeps us on the run? We look for adulation. We're trying to hit a mark. We're trying to be successful. We're trying to do all that stuff out there. How much does that keep us from ourself, do you think?
A lot.
Well, thanks for playing.
A lot.
And can you, and why do you say that?
Yeah. I think when someone is raised with the belief that they are depraved and wretched and totally broken, whenever they have an idea that is divine and they need to steward that creativity, they need to birth that idea into the world for the healing of themselves, for the healing of others. I have noticed that if they totally lack confidence in themselves because the religious circle they've been in has told them that they are broken and depraved and wretched and sinful, they will be hindered from chasing that goal, from birthing that idea. They will be hindered from that because they don't believe that they have the skill set to do it. They could think that It would be egotistical of them to think that they're good enough to do that. It would be, and it's just their ambition driving them, not this divine creativity that's moving through them. So yeah, it would hold them back from not only reaching their fullest potential of emotional health and self-love, but it would hold them back from literally, I watch too much Parks and Rec, literally, it would hold them back from literally helping others find healing with their work.
Yeah, I'm really glad your book is going to tackle this topic, Meg, because what I've noticed, I've been doing this Square One program, this 90-day program with people trying to help them move from deconstruction to reconstruction.
Right.
And one of the major factors that I've noticed and that we're talking about is exactly what you're talking about, like how religion, because it's all about fear and control, it teaches us, it trains us. I mean, it really almost brainwashes us into believing the lie that there's no good in me, right, that I'm a worm, that I'm worthless, and anything good that happens, oh, glory to God, that wasn't me, that was Jesus. But if anything, of course, then any negative thing that happens, well, oh, that's my sinful flesh, that's my true self. and so because of that, when we deconstruct that, we start deconstructing that sort of fear-based control, manipulation, religion, garbage. So that's good. We deconstruct the belief system, but we hang on, unfortunately, to that sort of brainwashing. And so we now need to also then relearn, or maybe learn for the first time. It's not relearning. We've never learned. We need to start to learn how to trust ourselves, to say that if I have an idea, it's a good idea. If I have a desire, that's a good desire. If you know what I mean? So not to mistrust and second guess all the time. And it's really, really hard to do that. So I'm glad your book is addressing that. And I'm curious, like, do you have any like specific advice for someone who's in that space of like, how can they do that? What are the things that they can do to sort of retrain their brain or get back into this place of learning how to, not to mistrust themselves, but to really have some faith in their own desires and their inner goodness?
Oh yeah. There's lots of advice in the book, but the first thing that comes to mind, well, to no surprise, 3 things come to mind, but which of the 3 is worth sharing on this interview? Okay. The first thing that comes to mind that I'm going to share, I'll share one because you asked for one. Sorry.
Fine. 2 or 3 is fine.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind is, first off, I'll start with the introspective relationship. How do you talk to yourself? What does your inner monologue sound like? And once again, nothing new there, but keeping that in check. And also reevaluating your relationships. And in the book, I unpack these 3 tiers of relationships and how that is healthy to have different tiers of relationships, different standards, different expectations, different boundaries, and check with yourself how often during your week are you around people that build you up, that make you feel loved, and then that love you outside of your talents and love you outside of your work, but also understand and support your work and your ideas and want you to reach your full potential and want you to own it, that you are this badass, creative, divine being, that God is just waiting on you to wake up and own your power. So check in with how you talk to yourself and your relationships. I'm trying to think of an author, because like you, all of you guys, and many of the listeners, I'm a verbal linguistic learner and a wannabe bookworm and a wordsmith. And so I learn best through words. Trying to think of an author that helped me the most, owning my power and owning that it was okay to say, I'm a badass at what I've been called to create. I got this. And my confidence and my ambition is not simple. Joan Chittister comes to mind. I want to be her when I grow up, except Catholic. She's so, I hope that was. What do you have any authors that you would recommend that you guys have read?
Well, the only one that comes to my mind, I recommend this guy all the time, but it's good because I think he's definitely worth reading. There's a guy named John Lynch, and he's become a good friend. He's actually a really super cool guy, but he wrote this book called The Cure. And that was the first time I encountered anybody directly attacking the sort of what I call worm theology. I'm a wretch I am. There's no good in me. Right. That whole nonsense. And that book, and it's a little book. I mean, I promise you could probably read it in a day if it's really, but you want to, after you finish it, you're going to go back and read it again. It's just a really powerful, beautiful book. It's not technical or clinical at all. It's actually, he tells a lot of stories and even a lot of allegories. It almost, parts of it even read almost like a C.S. Lewis, novel. And so, but it's a lot of really beautiful stories, and it's just really reframing in our minds that we're not worms and, we're not we're not wretches and all that kind of garbage. So that's one I recommend. I think is really great. I don't know, do you guys have any, Matt or Jamal, you guys have any books you recommend?
I don't read anymore.
Oh, okay. You just like rap.
Yeah, that's right.
He just raps.
I just rap.
Are there any rappers that you feel are very, that would help with this?
No, I think when Meg mentioned differentiation, Meg, have you read David Schnarch?
Gesundheit.
I'm aware of Schnarch. I had to read some of him in pastoral care classes. Yeah.
Okay, I like Schnarch. He has he talks about
good call.
differentiation a lot. I like his book Passionate Marriage. So it talks about how we often sort of misconstrue what marriage is really supposed to be like, and we think it's just about basically being attached to the person. He calls it emotional fusion. And what really needs to happen is that we need to stand on our own 2 feet. We need to be fully differentiated so that we can then live in a better relational way. And I just love that approach because it's not about necessarily your like-mindedness, your like beliefs that are that are similar, or your interests. It's really about fully differentiating from the other person so that you can become actually closer and not just emotionally fused. Because when we're emotionally fused with others, whether it's our spouse or our friends or our congregation, we're at risk, I think, for having a big existential crisis, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I have another quick question, Meg. I mean, when you were writing this book, in the back of your mind, did you have sort of a potential, like, are you writing this for a certain type of person or even a specific person? Like, are you thinking this book is, I want to speak to this kind of person. This book is going to help, someone who's in this situation. Did you have something in the back of your mind of like who you wanted this book to speak to?
I did actually. Yes, I did. So when the book first started, I knew I was obsessed with grit and the lack of grit and grace that I was seeing in ministerial leaders. And so I wanted to talk about that and how there was so much burnout and what's going on there. And then at a conference, a gentleman asked me, where'd this obsession from grit come from? And I realized, crap, it came from my crazy family because they're insanely unstoppable and they have so much grit. And so then it kind of morphed into this having more memoir-like moments. And then I realized what a weird case study I would make because I've been a paid church staff member from the ages of 17 to 32. And the majority of those years were on the same church staff. And so what a weird way to grow up in the fishbowl of a church staff. And I did. And so I thought, let's have a little self-deprecating fun and use my stories to explore these different parts of your own sanctuary. So we talk about the mind and emotions and the spirit, the soul, having grace for your body. And what does that look like when you're coming out of purity culture? I'm not answering your question. So all that to say, I'm so excited and proud of it because what it became is like, as you guys have heard me say, to sound like a broken record, but it became the book baby that Seth Meyers and Sister Joan Chittister had together. And so there's so many satirical, flippant moments that are just ridiculous and 100% accurate, but also there's hopefully some spiritual depth and nourishment for people. So I did narrow it down to people that are spiritually attuned go-getters. And what I mean by spiritually attuned go-getters is that they are very aware of the spiritual dimension of life. They're striving to be spiritually healthy. And at the same time, they are owning their power, their confidence. They love chasing and crushing goals. And they're doing it from a place of not only living their best life and reaching their fullest potential, but first and foremost to serve others. And so this is a spiritually attuned go-getters that's probably working their ass off and probably wants some respite from the rush of those goals. And so I picture this book by their bedside table, and they're just so spent from chasing goals and crushing it all day, and they're so tired, but they're like, oh, but I just want to laugh one more time before I go to bed. I'm gonna pick up I Am My Own Sanctuary again to remind me that I am beautifully and wonderfully made. I can wake up tomorrow and crush more goals, and yeah, I'm a badass, spiritually attuned go-getter. So that is who it's for. There are some moments of cathartic cuss words, and the purity culture chapter is going to offend people. And there's tons of neurological research by experts, not like me, but actual experts. And then there's tips to find your vocational calling. If you know you're a spiritually attuned go-getter and you want to own your power, but you're like, I'm not sure what I was made to do. There are 5 tips that spell it out. And the most exciting thing is that there's going to be a supplemental journal that comes out with the book.
Oh, wow.
Maybe not on release day. And it's going to we have 10 questions for each 6 chapter with lines.
Wow.
These lines that are just beckoning you to write on them and reflect through them. So yeah, I'm so excited. So excited how it's going to serve people. But yeah, that's who it's for. People that want to laugh and aren't afraid of cuss words.
Yeah, sounds awesome. So can I ask you this? I'm sorry to put you on the spot. So maybe we'll have to edit this out depending on on your answer. But so if you're doing a workbook for this, do you think this might also one day become sort of an online course? Hint, hint.
Yes. Yes.
I think you should.
Yes.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Yes. That is the plan. By the time our friends are listening, the book has been out for 4 days, and I'm going to cast a vision. I'm going to manifest this moment. We sold 100 copies of the book, which means I have the title of the book tattooed on my right arm now, which is awesome.
And you're going to shave your head, right?
I'm going to shave my head if 150 are sold on drop day.
Okay.
Just kidding. I'm way too vain for that. And then if 200 are sold, we're going to do a free online course over the book, a 5-week Zoom course. And so we're going to hope that those things happened by the time you're listening. So online course is coming for the book. Totally.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yes. And of course, I'm imagining you can get it wherever books are sold online.
Yes. Definitely.
Where would I get one of those? Can I get those at the Baptist bookstore or Family Bookstore or?
Yeah, it's Family Christian. Is Family Christian still available?
Family Christian stores, yeah.
You know what I just realized is I just found this out. My first book, it was turned down by 8 publishing companies, and then 2 were interested. Let it be known, but but one of them that turned it down, I saw them recently selling it, and it's a $14 book, and they were selling it for $25.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? How does that happen in the world of publishing? So funny.
That is weird.
Yeah. But,
wow. Well, I'm just, I'm going to say, Meg, I'm honestly, I'm just so excited that you are part of the choir family. I'm very excited that this book is out, and that, in general, when I look at, I'm proud of choir. I'm very proud to be a part of choir, and not just kissing up to Ralph, but I love you, Ralph. But I'm seriously though, I'm very excited because it's awesome to sit back and see new voices like yours kind of coming into the family and saying things that need to be said in the ways they need to be said, reaching audiences that definitely need to be spoken to and reached with these kind of ideas. I'm just excited. I'm so glad, and I know this will not be your last book. I'm hoping there's many more to come.
It's the 3rd one's brewing.
Bring it in. Yeah. Do it.
And I have the honor, I'm reading Rogie's book, Josh Rogie's and Mark Harris's next book for endorsement. And they're super, to no surprise, also just amazingly healing reads. So I'm excited to be among great spiritually attuned go-getter content creators.
Have we determined when your book comes out? Like, when is the release date and where can people get it? Have we already talked about that?
Yeah, I think we did. Actually. Say it again.
Yeah, December 6th. So,
very nice.
So it's out. Enjoy. Go get it.
What are you waiting for? Yeah, get it.
Yeah, Amazon. If you have any questions, go to megcalvin.com. I'm here to serve you.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Meg.
Yeah,
It's been a blast.
Thank you, guys. Keep up the amazing work.
yeah, you too. Yeah, you're awesome.
But
Your
no more
podcast.
heckling.
What was that?
I said no more heckling as a joke to Matt.
Well, I can't promise anything.
Yeah, I wouldn't put a lot of hope in that, actually.
I wouldn't expect you to.
All right. God bless Meg.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, yeah. Yep. Love Meg Calvin. Thanks, Meg.
Yes.
Yeah, and so excited that your book is out now. So everyone, go buy that book.
Yeah.
Get
Buy
on
it.
it.
Totally. And,
And then,
it's a book whose I believe it's very timely, especially. I just think this topic has been, self-care. The topic of self-care is kind of taboo in the Christian world. So I love that she's tackling it.
Yeah.
So why is it taboo, Jamal? Why do you think? Why I mean, our topic's gonna be self-care. Why is that such a taboo topic? Especially in Christianity.
It's a great question, Matt. Matt, you're a pro. You're a total pro at this.
I'm a total. I've been doing this for a while, man. Come on now.
Totally. Well, I'm sure we'll unpack it in the conversation, but I think there's a lot of confusion about what self even is. And I think that confusion of self, and there's a lot of, bad teaching that, I believe is one of the bedrocks of Christianity. I mean, I think there's these pillars that the Christian religion stands on. One of them, I believe, one pillar is that, this idea in the sin nature and the depravity of human beings and that kind of thing. And I think that really runs deep in a lot of Christian thinking. So there's a misconception about the self. And I think even the New Testament writers weren't clear on really what the true self really actually was. I think they were growing in that and awakening to that. So there's a lot of passages in the Bible that are used to support what I believe to be an incorrect understanding of self. And so therefore the self is something that is, really needs to be avoided in most religious or Christian conversation.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Jamal. I think it's something that in some ways it's a carryover just from religion in general, right? But I mean, I think you see in certain things, especially that Paul writes, like in Ephesians and Colossians and things like that, assuming Paul wrote those, that'll get into another can of worms, but assuming Paul wrote Ephesians and Colossians, which I don't always do, but there's some language that does seem to advance the idea that our self is more closely aligned with Christ, which would suggest then it's good, right? So the original goodness. But I also think at the same time, the some of this toxic teaching of depravity and stuff that comes from Calvinism, it's sort of weaponizing some verses and it's taking them farther than they need to be taken, even farther than I think is intended in the passages. So, we as human beings may tend to things that are selfish and self-destructive and that's not others focused, and that Jesus gives us a really positive example of how to do that and the benefits of doing that. And I think I agree with that. I think that's actually a good thing, and we should do that. But the problem is it's not the Bible. I think it's mostly Bible teachers that have twisted that to mean, therefore, your basic nature is evil and twisted, and there's no good in you, and this whole worm theology nonsense. I think it gets taken much farther than it needs to be taken. Like you can talk about Christ, the supremacy of Christ, without adding to that sort of this worm nature of humanity. Like those two things don't necessarily need to go together. Unfortunately, they do. But again, I think that sort of worm nature of humanity is mostly invented. Like I don't really think you can find a whole lot of passages where God is the one supposedly saying that we're unworthy and that we are, all that. Like I think we say that, people say that, we might say that about ourselves. Someone like David may say, what a wretch I am and all that. But that's what we're saying. That may be our tendency to do that to ourselves, but I don't think you ever see Jesus saying that to us or God saying that about us. Like we kind of create that narrative, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that is a part of how we as humans sort of function. And what I mean by that is that we tend to take the pendulum and swing it way too far.
Yeah.
And I think most of the time, like the truths of the universe seem paradoxical rather than one side or the other at first. And then we realize, well, there's a whole nuancing to this whole thing called truth. Yeah, on one hand, we could be total wretches. I could be a pretty bad piece of shit. Like I totally can. But I would never want to take it too far and say I'm like totally depraved and I'm totally wretched. And I think we always have to strike that balance and find maybe in Buddhism what would be called the middle way. And there's this I think it's okay to say that our true self is totally good, totally Christ-like, and totally whatever. We're made in the image of love, all this good stuff, and at the same time, be totally depraved at some point. Like in a certain way, like yeah, we are depraved. We can be wretches, but at the same time, like that's not our true nature. It's original goodness,
Yeah.
and then we read the wretchedness in that context. We don't read the goodness in the context that we are total wretches, and that's where like the Calvinists get it twisted. They get it backwards. We are originally good. Our self is to be made like Christ or Brahman, if you want to use Buddhist language. And then there's this obvious part of us that is not so good. But that's in the context of the goodness.
Yeah, I think when people say self, those are yeah, those are good thoughts. I think what I hear you saying, Matt, is that it depends on which self you're talking about, because I do think that there's more than one self at play in a given person's life. So, for example, and there's confusion. Or it's not clear in the Bible. It's the writers of the scriptures. It's not always clear what self they're referring to. So, and I think some of them weren't even aware of their full self. That's why I think it can be helpful to look to Jesus in this regard. So if we look, because Jesus is our standard, he's like us. He's the child of mankind. He's always referencing back to his humanity. He never references anything other than that. So everything that he says comes in the context or out of the flow of this is like what Paul says in Philippians 2. He took on a servant, the lowest of humanity. So everything he's going to demonstrate in his life is as a human. So that's where I think, okay, how did Jesus understand this concept of self? I think it's a really important question. But there are some unhelpful verses that I think should be pointed out that just have come to my attention. There's a verse where Paul says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. So the life I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God. And so when people will take about that, like, so yeah, so you die to yourself and then Christ lives through you. Or there's other passages that reference the unworthy nature of humanity. I think there's a passage in Revelation that talks about, no one was found worthy in heaven or on earth to open the scrolls except for, Jesus. So there's these, and I actually think those are bunk. Those concepts, those ideas, what's communicated in there, those are unhelpful, and they come from a limited. My understanding is that that's a very limited perspective on the self. So self, I think there's a couple. There's really three kind. There's like two major categories of self, and then there's one that's within that kind of a subcategory. But when people talk about self, and again, what you identify with. The self you identify with is really the life you live. So there's one category of self, in my opinion, in my understanding, is the self that is really has a birthday, has the start, has the end. Your name is, my name is Jamal. I was born on a certain day. Then my concept of self comes out of how my parents, saw me or treated me, and then I begin to adopt views of myself based on my interactions and all other things. And I have a whole story, and this is my self. That self can have has a story, but also you have a shadow side as well. There's another subcategory in that self where your emotional self and how things have affected you. And those are all legitimate parts of self. But there's also, and again, Jesus referenced that part of himself as well. So if you look at Jesus, when he talked about self, he said some things like, the son can do nothing of his own accord, but that what the son sees the father doing, that's what I do. So, he would, or not my will, let yours be done in the garden. So he's referencing a smaller self, which is his human storied self. Like we can all relate to that. The problem is that predominantly that's all people ever know as their self, is that small s, that small self. When people like the caller who talked about annihilationism or eternal conscious torment, people are referencing that small self as what happens to that self. And that's part of the problem, because that's really not who you are. That self is temporary. That self is dualism, but there's another self. And this is where it gets controversial. There's another self Jesus referenced, and that is the divine self, the Christ self. When he said, before Abraham was born, I am. When he talked about, I must be about my father's business, he's not referencing Joseph. This is the I am divine self. I believe that is very much a part of who we are in our identity as well. And I think that is what's missing from the Christian conversation. There's a blindness to the divine self, and all we reference and all we live according to is the small self. And that causes all the problems and all of our suffering, in my opinion.
Mm.
So are you suggesting then, to go back to the topic, that in order to care for that self, we have to first recognize that capital S self is a part of the divine?
Yes, I think absolutely. So when people talk about self-care, I'm sure Meg gets into this in her book, but part of self-care is taking time to go inside internally. So when Jesus would even talk about like the kingdom of heaven, it's within you. Like there's this, I think, a false misnomer that somehow, and this is how I always understood it and was taught in the Christian world, was like, we're like these bottles, these empty, clay pots, these worthless clay pots that are just cracked and messed up. And inside is some treasure. That treasure inside is not us, by the way. It's Christ. It's God. You are worthless, but there's God inside of you, and that's what makes you worth anything. And that's I think, a very limited and unhelpful understanding of really the essence of who Jesus never talked about himself that way. He never referenced himself as some worthless container that's possessed by a spirit, i.e. God. So we're not people who are possessed by God. We literally are the image in very exact nature. We are the essence of the divine in human form. Like we say Jesus is incarnate. This is my understanding. This is controversial. By no means is this widely accepted. That's why Christians don't believe this. But I firmly believe my understanding is like, if you look at Jesus, here's a person who knew his essence, his higher self. So to come back to that is like self-care would be to come inside, to get quiet. One of the passages I love the most, where it says, be still and know that I am. To say, be still, know that I am God, is redundant, because the name of God is I am. So, that's the name of God, is I am. You can't actually say the name of God without self-reference. I don't know if you guys know that or caught that. You actually can't say God's name without using it in the first person. And I think that's where it becomes really mind-bending, in a sense, when you start to come inside and realize, oh, the self, this is the self that is literally, when you claim being, I am, you are claiming a divine statement like Jesus did. So this is what I think is very unknown and misunderstood. And again, to come back to self-care is like, it's to come back to awareness of this self, this place of being.
So can I ask?
Yeah. Well, I think, go for it.
I was just going to ask, so if our topic is self-care, we haven't yet really got to, we've done a good job, I think, of defining self. But what is self-care, and what does that look like, and why is that important?
Well, why is it important? I think, Jesus makes this statement, love your neighbor as yourself. And to me, it's important. I don't know. This is where I have a disconnect from where most Christians view themselves as. I don't know how you can love others or love God if you don't love yourself in a certain way. If you think of yourself as a wretched worm, how can you view your neighbor as anything other than how you view yourself? And how are you supposed to love them if you view yourself as a wretched worm?
Well, Yeah.
And
About that though, can I just say, I don't disagree with the thought process that, you can't love other people if you don't love yourself. Like if you just said that statement alone, I would agree. And I think actually, like for example, a few years ago, my mind was blown about the reality of the reciprocal nature of this. When Jesus says, the greatest command is to love God and to love others, right? The two greatest commands, right? All the laws is summarized in this: love God and love others. But it's not a one-way street. Like I have to not only, as an individual, I have to not only learn how to love God and love others, I have to learn how to first, I would say, I need to learn how to receive love from God. And then I need to learn how to receive love from others, because if I'm in a room with 10 people and all of them are trying to follow those two commands, love God and love others, but none of us is willing to receive love from God or from other people in the room, we will all fail at those two commands. Because if in other words, you can't love me if I won't let you, right? If I'm not receiving love from you, you can knock yourself out trying to love me, but I'm shut off. I'm closed up to it, and I'm not putting myself in a position to receive it. So for me personally, that was a huge epiphany. Like, oh my gosh, man, I frankly don't even think I know how to receive love from God. Like I had not thought about it. And actually, when I started to think about it, I realized that I really wasn't very good at receiving love from God or from others. Because you have to be vulnerable. You have to open yourself up. There's the potential that another person could hurt you, right? If I'm going to open myself up to love from another person. And so those for me are big, big things like that it needs for that idea of loving God and loving others to be fulfilled. We have to be people who first learn to receive love.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest things to learn how to receive from is yourself, because I don't even think that's even understood. Because again, the idea is, well, our perception of self is that we're lacking. So it's like, we're looking for something to receive from. A lot of people are looking to God. They're going, yeah, I need God to fill me up because I feel empty. And they're looking outside of themselves. This is the problem of the external God, which, by the way, is not what Jesus did not talk about an external God. This is the creation. This comes out of a misperception. So people, it's an illusion. We look for, God out there. So we're looking for God to love us so that we can receive that love. But you're not going to find that God out there. There is no God out there. All you have is self. Good news is it's in that self. The oneness of within yourself is where you find the divine. And so the reason I think it's important to love yourself in order to love other people is because think about like walking down a street and somebody's thirsty, dying of thirst, and you have like water to give them and you don't give them that water. Well, that's not love. So first you would have to give them water, but in order for you to have water to give them, you have to get that water. Where are you going to go get that water? Like, where is that water found? That water is only found in that place of stillness within your being, which is what Jesus referenced as the kingdom of heaven within you. Or when, the knowledge of the divine comes through stillness. What do you find in stillness? You are present with yourself, and that's where God is. But that's also where you are. So that's the idea. You receive from self, from that place of being. So being still, you become aware of I am, which is, by the way, first person, which is presence, which is being itself. That's what so self-care, learning to love the small self, is to get to know your big self, because the only person that can love the small self is yourself.
Yeah.
The big self.
But and how is that done? Is that done through meditation? Is that done through daily affirmations? How do we care for that self in the practical day to day?
That's a great question, and that's the $1 million question, where the rubber meets the road. I do think it comes through awareness of the big self. But how do you get to become aware of that? I think there's a lot of ways. Right. But one of the time tested ways, and this has been demonstrated for thousands of years, is people just breathing. Literally. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, you can know everything you need to know about God through breath and awareness. This goes way beyond just cognitive information that you feed your brain. This is true knowledge that comes from your spiritual essence. It comes through breath, through connection with self. So you could do that through meditation. You can do it through mindfulness practices. There's definitely lots of different ways. But prayer, what is prayer? It's tuning into the conversation. There's already a conversation going on at the level of spirit. My understanding is that prayer is something that happens all the time without ceasing. It's like always. But what is that? That's your breath. And then at that level, it's constant. Consciousness is all the time. And once you tap into that, you usually have to stop what you're doing, though, to get aware of that. You have to stop. And this is why, and Meg talks about this in her book, this is why clergy are so burned out. They're the least people that know about God. They know information about God, but they don't live from a knowledge of God because they're so busy. And this is the problem, because we have to stop what we're doing in order to actually care for the self, because, but people, we're drilled in. Like, if you just sit and breathe, what are you accomplishing?
Yeah.
And that's the rub.
Yeah, I would. I just want to reflect back a couple of things that you said, Jamal, because here's the thing. I think, though, in reality, like it's gonna sound like I'm disagreeing with you on some terminology, but I think where you and I would align is the practice. So we may be thinking of the mechanism in slightly different terminology, but I think at the end of the day, what we would both sit down next to each other and do would look very similar. So, like for me, going back to what you were saying, like, I agree with you. The idea that God is being outside of myself is the wrong idea. Like, to say that, well, where is Jesus? Where is Christ? Where is God? A lot of Christians think he's up there somewhere, and we're waiting for Jesus to come back. We can't wait for him to get back, because then it'll be great. But that, again, I agree with you. Jesus doesn't say that. But I would say actually that the way I think of it is, I'm connecting with the God who is inside of me. So it isn't me. I would not call it myself. I would say, like when Jesus says, abide in me and I will abide in you, or that if you love me, my Father and I will love you, and the Father and I will come and make our home in you. That's what Jesus is wanting us to understand, is that God is within us. And so what I'm connecting to is not a God out there. I am connecting to a God or a Christ within, who dwells within me, abides within me. And by connecting to and abiding in that, to me, that's what Jesus is talking about. This abiding in Christ is connecting with the God who is closer to me than my own heartbeat, closer to me than my own breath, and even closer to me, to myself than my own self, right? It is a connection to the divine that there's no seam. You can't tell where one ends and the other begins, right? And so for me, then, yes, the way I would connect with this Christ who abides within, to God who lives within me. This is my source for love. So going back, talking about like with the water walking down the street, I would say I get that water from Christ, who is the living water. And he, by again, like the learning to receive love from God is important, because I need to receive that love from God so that I have love within me to give to someone else. And so the way it would look for me is that, yeah, I would get quiet. I would breathe. I would close my eyes. I would sit in silence. I would make myself aware of the reality that God loves me, and he's within me, and he always has been, and he always will be. And so the process, yeah. So the terminology might be slightly different, but I think at the end of the day, what you're doing and what I'm doing look a lot the same, and the effect is the same.
Right. Now, I think we do probably have very similar practices, but Keith, I will say the difference here is significant, because again, we're talking about when we say it's Christ in me, there's a distinction that's being made. There's Christ and then there's me, and they're not the same thing. But I don't think that distinction is really.
Yeah, well, this has always been
valid.
The disagreement you and I have, right? Is that I would say Christ is in me, and you would say Christ is me. Right. Yeah,
exactly. And you and all of us and everything. But here's why I think this is an important point, because again, now this is not a new distinction or new disagreement or whatever. I think you can find this even in the scriptures. So in John chapter 1, the writer of the Gospel of John in chapter 1 said, he's talking about, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. But then a few verses later, he goes in and says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. Now that's an interesting distinction. So it's okay. So John the Baptist is not the light of the world. but he came to testify about the light. This is coming from the writer of that gospel. That's the perspective. But there's a contradiction here, because later on, Jesus, I think, kind of corrects the perception. And he says, I am the light of the world. And no one argues with that. But then his biggest contribution, I think, one of the things that he's trying to drill in the minds of the disciples are, but so are you. So he would disagree. I don't think the writer of this gospel was really clear about that. So Jesus' words are, but so are you the light of the world. He actually claimed that he wasn't the only one that's the light of the world. And he didn't say, hey, if you do the things I say, or if you pray the sinner's prayer, or if you're baptized, you're the light. No, he just said, this is who you are. But no one takes a light and hides it under a bed. So that indicates somebody's under a bed, some under a bushel. There's a light that's being covered up. And how is it being covered up? Because we don't know who we are. So he's correcting it. You are also the light of the world. He's speaking as a man. So it's incorrect to say Jesus is the light, but we're not. So, and guess what God is, by the way? God is light. So this is when we start to grow in our understanding of self. This is where I think the distinction starts to go away. It's like, yeah, what's God? What's self? We don't know, because the same things apply to all of us. I'm like, I know this is the distinction. This is why I think it's important, because that disagreement is even found in the Gospel of John itself.
I think so too. We're both right.
I think you guys are both right, to be honest with you.
It just depends on which self you're referencing.
I can quote John Calvin, and I think
don't do that. Don't do that.
Even Calvin says, I'm going to fuck off, Keith. A quote. Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected together by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other. And I think that's really wise. And because it's like our knowledge of God and our knowledge of self is so intertwined that it's like the chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah.
And that's why I would say both. You guys say you're disagreeing. I'm not sure if you are, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I don't know.
Well, no, that's what I was trying to say in the beginning, was that I think that Jamal and I disagree on some terminologies about how we get there, but I think where he and I both get is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I just
think you define it differently than I define it. You might use different terminology than I would use. I think we would describe the mechanism slightly different. But at the end, what you and I are doing and practicing are exactly the same.
Right. I just think it's important when how somebody understands themselves. Because and again, in my coaching work, I'm dealing with people all the time, and where we see major breakthroughs is when people's perception of self radically elevates. So, for example, I think it's really powerful. It makes people cringe. I say, look yourself in the mirror. I know it sounds cliche and all that, but like, look yourself in the mirror, or tell somebody you love. Say, hey, I just want you to know that I am the light of the world. You watch the reactions you get. People will roll their eyes. They're like, oh, that's crazy. You're a cult leader, whatever. It's like, but like Jesus referenced himself. I'm the light of the world. Didn't bat an eye. What if we could be like that? What if we are actually the light of the world? That's the whole point. It's like, I don't think Jesus points to himself exclusively in these matters. And I think that's the fatal error of Christianity, is it points to Jesus exclusively. It's a misnomer. He ceases to be an example then, in my opinion. He ceases to be an example for us if we point to him. So we have to come back and go, who are we? Like, it's not who do we say God is, it's who do we say we are.
Yeah. Well,
I think that's
I think we got to keep exploring this, but a little birdie is telling me that we're running out of time, which brings me to the next point. We're going to carry this conversation on into the next round. And if you want to get the next round, you got to go to patreon.com/heretichappyhour and sign up. And we're going to give you all bonus content, because this conversation needs to keep going. And it also needs to keep going in our Facebook group, Heretic Happy Hour Podcast, which is exclusively for Patreon supporters. So please jump in on this conversation and give us your thoughts in that after you sign up and subscribe on Patreon.
Yep. And then after you do that, you need to go to the heretichappyhour.com website, where not only can you listen to episodes and download a lot of really cool stuff. Oh my gosh, do we have an awesome store full of incredible t-shirts and pillows. Oh my gosh, please get these throw pillows. Buy one for your buy one for your favorite aunt or uncle, especially if they're like a really strong evangelical Christian. with scripture verses that will blow their minds if they actually look them up and read them. It'll be so much fun. Trust me.
Yes, and I believe we are. We have a live show coming up.
Hell yeah.
Yes.
Oh
Woohoo.
yes.
That's right. Are you coming? Are you guys coming?
I think I'll be there. Yeah.
I'll try to make it.
If there's free
I'm gonna be
donuts,
there.
yeah, I'll be there.
Yes. It's going to be at the Sidecar offices in Costa Mesa on Saturday, January 4th. And I believe those usually start around 6:30.
Mm-hmm.
So come on out and bring your coffee mugs. And,
Fill it with
yeah.
booze.
Fill it with lots of
Other
booze
thing.
and donuts. Yes.
Yes. And also we are now on iTunes.
Yes.
If you'd like to go and rate us and
Finally.
review us.
Judge us.
Yes.
Give us a judgment.
Rate us, please.